Hey everybody, Dr. Melissa here, welcoming you back to another episode of the Empathic Leader, where we talk all things empathy, emotional intelligence, and leadership. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. Today is part 2 of a 3-part series where we go in deep on my upcoming book, The Empathic Leader, which will be out July 15th. Why I wrote it, why I think it's important, and what we can learn from it. So let's get into it.
That's one of the things you speak a lot about in that book, in the book, is the way that this cast a gray cloud over many parts of your life during that time. And if somebody comes to you and mentions, a similar incident or, similar happenings in their organization or things that happened to them, my gut reaction is I would want them to feel empowered to speak about it and bring it up to the right people. But how do you even sometimes people need that kind of time to take for themselves. How do you even help people begin to formulate how to respond?
I think that goes back again to the self-reflection and the self-awareness, because before you can actually respond, you have to understand what happened, the self-reflection, and the effect that it had on you and what you're doing, the self-awareness. Unfortunately, a lot of people, like I was, are locked into their jobs for whatever reason. So unfortunately, you have to deal with it. If it's bad enough, the best thing you can do is just get out, because it's not going to get better. And there's no other way around it. But unfortunately, for a whole bunch of reasons, mine was that I wasn't going to find another job. I was applying for jobs during this time, but there just weren't that many. I got a couple interviews. I got kind of close on a couple, but it just never quite happened. And of course, keeping in mind that, as this is going on, your self-confidence tanks, your belief in what you're doing tanks, any kind of top level performance, whether that performance is on a French horn or, on spreadsheets, you take the top 10% off because of the ongoing stress that's happening. So, trying to get out can be really, really difficult.
Absolutely. And that comes with that. With the academic, you could say I stick it out until I get tenure, or I leap off into the unknown. And even though that's absolutely terrifying and might even keep me in a survival state longer because I need to figure it out with a completely different set of unknowns. That's so, and especially when there's 12 jobs in your career that you could take with that, benefits, security, which is what you were hoping for when you chose that in the first place. So I'm confronted by how many variables could keep you or working against trying to get justice.
Yes.
Because there are so many things in the way of that. Yes.
And that's a big reason why I wrote this book, just knowing that you're not alone, because that's what happens is people suffer in silence.
Yeah.
They think they're the only one. They are just like, okay, well, I guess this is just what I'm doomed to do. And it affects every single part of their life. And just knowing that they're not alone might be something, or being able to reach out to leaders that see that there's stuff that may not be quite right, that they're doing the best they can as a leader, that they're trying to do what they need to do, but maybe it's not working quite right. It's like I said, there were some bad actors in my story, but for the most part, I really think these are good people who meant well. And I think that's the truth for most leaders as well. Most of them are good people and they mean well, but they don't necessarily understand the implications of their actions.
Absolutely. And for those others that aren't those that necessarily mean well, could we talk a little bit about that? Because you mentioned that a little in the book. It feels the kind of the dark triad traits. How do you identify that? How do you even think about that subset of people in leadership positions? And what do you do when you realize you might be working for one?
Well, here's the bad news about that. So dark triad are psychopaths, sociopaths, Machiavellians, and narcissists. They're actually talking about making it a dark tetrad and adding sadism to that as well.
I don't think we should make that shape any bigger,
Well, either, honestly, it's horrible. But one thing that does distinguish every single one of these people in there is they have no empathy or very diminished empathy. So that is part of what this is. And the weird thing is it's not a disorder. I mean, you can have narcissistic disorder, but narcissism as a thing is a behavior description. I mean, this is the behavior. So it's not like it's something we're going to treat and help with. And in all reality, these people don't want help or to be treated anyway. This is what they are, and they don't have that empathy. That's just, the studies show it has to do with brain chemistry. Some of it has to do with growing up. Some of it has to do with environment. Some of it has to do with experience, all the way around. That's just how it is. Now, according to research, they figure 2 to 5% of the population fall into this category. So they're going to be there. And there's even some idea that number may be growing. It could be up to 7% now for a whole bunch of reasons, which is like a whole nother show all by itself. But the point is that you're not going to escape them completely. They're there. And because it's a behavior thing, all of us have a certain amount of narcissism in our behavior. It all exists on the spectrum. Some of us do have a little bit of manipulative in us, which is the Machiavellian side of things. So this could be happening on a behavioral level, as opposed, a small n narcissist instead of a big N narcissist, someone that behaves that way instead of someone who is one. Unfortunately, because we're talking leadership positions, and that can be, in government, that can be medically, like surgeons or top level people, that can be in the C-suite, anybody that takes those top levels, they tend to think the percentage of people that are dark triad in those levels is higher, like more like 20 to 25%, potentially.
I would imagine that the first time a lot of people encounter that kind of personality is in the workplace, just given the nature of, and that makes it even more difficult to know how to respond in any situation. But I think one of the takeaways is when somebody is in that triad or tetrad and has a leadership position, they have many limitations in their ability to relate to you as a human being and not a pawn, right? Yeah. They don't have a vested interest in your well-being because they literally lack the brain chemistry in order to do so. And they also might have very good qualities as well. They might be great storytellers, right? This is somebody you've known for years, perhaps, but then you realize you can look back on it later on with more context. Oh, that's what this was. That makes sense. Why that was so strange. And it brings up a lot of questions. Do I want to continue here? That feels like a level of randomness to subject yourself to and potential harm that can be extremely damaging. And as somebody who's been through that, it's don't recommend once you've identified. Yeah, there's a lot to want to change, a place, a culture, maybe think you can skirt around evoking certain reactions for certain reasons. But there's also times when you just need to protect yourself and jump into the unknown instead of staying in kind of that petri dish of cluster B personality, not to pathologize,
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think for those of us with empathy too, because we do what's called perspective taking. We try to think about what it is in the other person's shoes, but it's always through our own eyes. So for us to look at someone like that, we don't always get it right away because it's really foreign. For me, I'll admit that's part of why I started looking at this, because I'm like, I am so confused. Just the utter confusion all the time at this behavior. I never saw it coming because it's just not part of who I am. So it shocked me every single time, and still does, because I'm just, that's just not how I'm wired.
Those kinds of personalities that we're talking about, the dark triad, benefit from that kind of projection. Oh, you can make all these explanations for justifying certain behavior in your own head, but a lot of people either don't deserve that projection that you have, or it takes a while to realize, like you're saying, that brains work differently, and it's almost distancing yourself from your own. What are you putting onto this person versus what have they shown you? And what have they shown you, both in what they have demonstrated wanting to learn and or embody, and then also the actions that you talk about in the book. And you mentioned that in the book. Can you speak a little bit to the difference between wanting to embody or projecting? In an interview, a lot of people can speak to company culture and give a good impression, but the actions sometimes are different. Can you speak to that gap?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I do want to add too is just that even as we're talking about that, that people that display that kind of disregard for other people to that degree, to a degree of maliciousness, they're in the minority. So even as we're talking about leaders, we're not saying all leaders are like this, because that's not the case, and it's just part of human behavior. It is what it is. But there are some out there, and there are signs, because I know you've had your experience with it too,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. What do you think about us talking about your consulting, with people and watching them change, the case study like you have with the doctor from India or Sharon?
Because I think the interesting thing too, so they're both, people that I had worked with, and they're in the book. One of them wanted to change, the other didn't. And the outcome is striking, right? So the doctor from India that I worked with, she was having trouble because she was in a Midwestern city, and she wasn't necessarily trusted because there were some cultural differences because of her accent, and also because of the fact that she was a woman. And her point to me, they brought me in basically to help her understand empathy and connecting and understanding with some of the other employees she worked with, but also her patients, because again, at the end of the day, healthcare is a business and patients are the product. And if you drive your patients away, it's hard to make a profit, So
Sure.
I came in to help her out with that and just say, this is how you can actually connect with your patients. This is how you can keep it so you're not driving away your assistants and your nurses, this kind of thing. And her point was, how do you know what it is to be me? You want me to connect with these people, but you're not a female, Indian physician. You haven't been in my shoes. You don't know what it's like to be me. And she's right. I don't know precisely in her situation what it is, but I do know what it is to be highly driven. I do know what it is to be the only female in the room of a very male-dominated field. I do know what it is to feel ostracized because of the way I look or the way I sound or the way I come across. So we basically came to the conclusion that, yes, I could help her, even though I was not another female Indian physician. That we did have this in common. And I won't say it was ever a warm relationship, because it wasn't, but there was a mutual respect that was gained there. And I was actually able to help her. She eventually ended up leaving the institution and moving on somewhere else. But, we were able to make that happen. Whereas the other one that go ahead. I don't mean to.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that's such an important distinction there of, and that's a section you have in the book that says, what if I can't relate because I haven't been there? And you write that, remember that empathy happens when you're feeling what another is feeling, not when you've experienced what another has experienced. And I thought that was so resonant because, of course, it's easier to have empathy when you have directly experienced the same tragedy, maybe a parent dying or something like that. Wow, I can directly relate to exactly that experience. But at the end of the day, all of these experiences evoke emotions, and you might not be a female physician in India, but you know what it's like, as you're saying, to feel prejudiced against and unfairly treated because of the nature of who you are, and that is something that you can relate to. And I think that opens up using empathy in terms of the emotions that get evoked. We all know what it's like to be sad. We all know what it's like to be angry. We all know what it's like to be annoyed or frustrated or, all of these things. That feels like that opens up a different level of connecting instead of needing to have the same direct experience. And also I feel like that could also be a block to empathy, of believing that you need to look exactly the same, live the same exact trajectory of your life, in order to allow yourself to connect with somebody else's experience.
Yes. And it's one that I actually hear come up a lot. Well, I don't know what it is to be X. I don't know what it is to be a millennial. I don't know what it is to be female. I don't know what it is to be Indian, whatever, and no, you don't. And actually admitting that is good, because you'll also get the ones that are like, well, let me tell you what it's like to be me. And it's like, no. We're talking about this experience. We're not comparing. We're not stacking up. We're just feeling what's happening and cognitively understanding all of this. So, it's cool to not know and to admit that. That's okay. But on the other hand, as human beings, we have certain experiences that we all share. It's in our biology. So, to be able to understand on that level, well, for most of us, minus our triad, it's in our biology. So to be able to understand someone else on that level and just be, in feeling, because that's what empathy means. M means in, and pathos means feeling. You are in the feeling. That's it. You don't have to layer anything on top of that about understanding or situations or anything like that. It's just a matter of connecting and understanding human to human. It's that simple and that complex all at the same time.
And that feels, the desire to be in feeling requires a level of goodwill, I think, that is such a green flag if you're entering a new place or trying to evaluate your current organization, because that's the opposite of the kind of authoritarian leadership that we've talked about. Totally. And there's also another level to this of there are baseline levels of empathy that vary between people, but also having empathy doesn't mean that you know how to employ it effectively as a leader. So can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, I actually think this is a big one, because we have a lot of people out there saying right now, empathy is kind of a hot topic right now, has been since about 2022 with the Great Resignation and with the pandemic. I'd say it maybe even goes back a little earlier than that. But everybody going, just use empathy, just have empathy. Well, great. How do I do that? Well, I don't know. Just go use it. Well, but I have empathy. What do I do with it? I don't know. Just go have empathy. Well, any amount of empathy is better than none at all. Absolutely. I'm not arguing with that. But if you can't use it actionably, if you can't take it and use it as a skill-based tool, then it might give you a warm, fuzzy feeling, but it's not actually being used to its fullest potential. The analogy I use in the book is that it's like a treadmill. If you have a treadmill and it sits in the corner and you hang clothes on it and the cat sleeps on it, maybe you dust it once a month. That's great. You have a treadmill, but you don't get results unless you use it. And then you get results. It's the same thing. You can have empathy, and it's great to have it because, it does humanize us. But if you use it, that's when you're going to see the results.
Absolutely. On the topic of using it, I feel like you are probably very experienced in introducing the concept of empathy and relating in organizations that it's completely foreign to. If I'm a leader that has a company that's working, the shareholders are happy, but they're not thrilled, right? Let's talk about, obviously we want goodwill to be a huge part of and treating their people right of any organization. But if we could talk about strictly the numbers, the cold, hard numbers for a minute, can you tell me what are some of the benefits of actually employing actionable empathy in your organization and educating your workforce about this?
Yeah. So the way I teach empathy within organizations, for years, empathy was considered to be part of the emotional intelligence tool basket. The way I see it, it actually needs to come before. You have to connect with your people before you know what emotional intelligence tools to grab. That's why we've been talking about emotional intelligence since it was first mentioned in 1991. We know what it is. We know it's important. We still don't quite know how to effectively use it. So if you're using empathy first to be able to grab into that tool bag and know whether you need to grab a chisel or a left-handed screwdriver, now you can actually use those emotional intelligence tools. And here's an example. One of them that's in that basket is communication. This is a big one, actually. And right now in our country, according to the Grammarly-Harris report for 2023, so it's actually a little out of date now, we lose 1.2 trillion with a T dollars per year on bad communication. And it's getting worse because we have a greater quantity of communication, but a lesser quality. And with the integration of AI, which it's not even a who, which really doesn't understand humans and how we work and how we communicate, it's getting worse. So it's reached a point now where employees are spending so much time communicating that in a recent survey, I think it was the Ernst & Young survey, 100% of them expect to get some kind of bad communication during the week. 25% expect it to be every day. And it's gotten so bad that they're wasting like 7.65 hours per week on bad communication. And they're actually calling it the unofficial 4-day work week. And these are all hard numbers. Whereas if you had the empathy to actually be able to connect to that emotional intelligence skill of communication and do it well, there will always be miscommunication, but you could certainly cut into that number somewhat and add some of that 1.2 trillion back into your bottom line instead of just throwing it out the window and basically giving everybody a day off to bang their head against the desk because of frustrating communication.
And if I'm a key decision maker that hears all of this and says, well, like you said before, that's the way we've always done things, or, we're just so to the limit already that we can't even afford to spend more time on something else because we're barely getting by as it is. How would you respond to that?
The biggest plague that's coming up against organizations right now is employee attrition. And it is. You lose an employee, you lose 90 to 200% of their wages trying to get another employee into that spot. Can you really afford not to try and create better understanding and connection with your employees? Because maybe the reason why things are so crazy and so pinched and so hectic is because you don't have the environment where employees can flourish. Can you really afford not to?
My answer to that would be no, if I was one of those people.
I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but yeah.
It's so interesting because there are people that understand this, naturally, and maybe they were brought up in families that had certain levels of it or had mentors or have experienced certain levels of emotional maturity from people in their lives. There are the key decision makers that we're talking about that are going to need to make those decisions in order to welcome it in to the benefit. But there's also in the moment, right? If there is a conflict happening, it's almost like there is a reverting quality that can happen in conflict and high stress situations where the desire to employ empathy becomes less on the emotional primal brain than the desire to defend against anything that feels remotely uncomfortable. And that will then make me want to scream, at somebody else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not the empathic response, but there's almost a defensiveness from displaying goodwill because it feels threatening to power positions or I don't know what the answers are, but there is that defensiveness and resistance that can get in the way of really relating to people in a healthy and good-natured way that is going to help the organization the ways that we discussed. How do you talk about that or think about that gap between the capacity and the desire?
I think that comes back again to self-reflection, because we're all going to do things that we're not proud of. It's going to happen. And in the heat of the moment, it's really going to happen. It just does. We do the best we can. You reflect on it prior, say, well, what would I do in this situation? How should I act in this situation? What is the best thing for me to do here? But life is unpredictable. That's going to happen. So if you're self-reflecting and it's, after the fact and you're like, yeah, I really could have done that better. What would empathy say that I should do here? Well, the answer is by blowing up and creating that situation, you've broken down the connection and understanding. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, a touchy-feely kind of situation. Having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. I mean, something may have happened that was completely out of your control, and that doesn't mean you go in and, oh, I'm so sorry. And, it's not necessarily absolutely like that. Empathy doesn't have to be a touchy-feely, sensitive thing. It can be very skill-based and strategic. But you still need to have that self-reflection and say, yeah, I really didn't respond well in that. And if I want to have optimal understanding and connection so that I can optimize profit, productivity, and innovation, I do need to, at least discuss this and create an understanding here of what happened, why this can't happen again, whatever it is, or what we need to do to avoid this in the future.
It feels like that is a level of accountability that demonstrates that we are people in feeling together. That accountability is a display of empathy. And it's almost like within, and going back to your story for a second, after that terrible incident and hostility that happened after, happened, you made a bid in that organization to have your experience validated and have meet you with empathy as we're discussing. And you made many bids and they were unanswered, right? And some of them were flat out rejected. And if somebody screams at somebody, which ideally wouldn't happen in a workplace, but if it does, there are things you can do to correct it. But bids can need to be mutual, right? You write in the book that empathy at its best is mutual. It can't be coming from only one place. And if there's a lack of bids that are coming from other people, and you notice that it's only coming from one person, whether that's yourself or somebody else, that is a sign that something is wrong in the water. Yes. So can you speak to bids for empathy and the need for that to be coming from multiple points within the organization in order to succeed?
Yeah. Well, again, having empathy doesn't mean you don't have boundaries. Mm-hmm. So if you feel you're putting that out and it is never reciprocated, and it's actually becoming detrimental, you can just kind of, okay, maybe I still feel this, maybe I still think this, but I don't act on it. In that case, making it inactive would actually be the best thing you could probably do if it's bad enough. One thing though I have noticed is that if you do have this, you tend to collect people around you that have it, assuming that you're open about it and you're talking. And, I didn't, because I was quiet. Mm-hmm. I was kept quiet and I stayed quiet. So I didn't collect people around me for a whole bunch of reasons. But if you're actually talking and like you're in a leadership position and you are this kind of person, people will gravitate toward that because now you're building culture. Mm-hmm. And if this is the kind of culture you want to have, that's how you do it, by creating that action, by creating that atmosphere, by leading through example, that sort of thing. And even if you're not in a top leadership position, you can do that within your own enclave. And, you just never know, because these may be the skills that you're practicing now to be able to use empathy strategically and skill-based that maybe aren't appreciated in this organization, but in the next one it is. Or then you're able to move up in another organization later on. Or you take these skills home and you use them in other organizations, like family, like in the church, like in your community, like with your bridge club. It doesn't matter. We're all humans being human, and it works.
I think that's such a great point because, like you're saying, empathy is a transferable skill.
Yeah.
And if you learn it to employ it in the workplace, it's going to help you in your relationship. It's going to help you, with your friend group. Anywhere where there's people that are with other people, it's going to benefit. And that is a easier sell, I think, than limiting it to one domain, because not only is that not true, we can't keep compartmentalizing aspects of who we are, and there should be boundaries in work and relationships and things like that, but there's this idea that I can just be a robot and show up to work and completely disregard the welfare of other people next to me, that's pretty dystopian.
Thank you again for tuning into part 2 of this 3-part series on my book, The Empathic Leader. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment so that we can keep this conversation going. And thank you so much again for being here. Next week is week 3, and we'll get into the last bits of the book. Thanks so much, and go use some empathy.